It was a crisp Monday morning in Washington, D.C. when the eyes of the nation turned toward an unexpected courtroom battle. Pam Bondi, now serving as the United States Attorney General, had just taken her seat in a high-profile case concerning religious freedoms. The case, expected to be a straightforward argument on federal law, took a shocking turn when Judge Harold Lancaster, known for his strict adherence to courtroom decorum, called out Bondi for a surprising reason. Attorney General Bondi, Judge Lancaster said in a stern voice, "I must remind you that religious symbols are not permitted to be visibly displayed in my courtroom. You are in violation of this rule." Pam Bondi, a woman of unwavering conviction, raised an eyebrow in confusion. She was dressed in her usual power suit, sharp, professional, and composed. The only thing that stood out was a small, delicate gold cross hanging from a thin chain around her neck. "My apologies, Your Honor," she responded evenly. "However, with all due respect, my cross is a personal article, and as a citizen of this nation I have the right to express my faith, just as many others do in public spaces." The judge leaned forward. "You are an officer of the court, Madam Attorney General, and the law states that while representing the United States government, you must maintain complete neutrality in religious matters. That includes avoiding the display of personal religious symbols during official proceedings." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notepads while news anchors whispered urgent updates into their microphones. This was unprecedented. "Your Honor," Bondi began, her voice calm but firm, "are you suggesting that my wearing a cross, a symbol of my personal faith, somehow impairs my ability to uphold the law?" The judge exhaled. "I am merely stating that this court has rules. You are held to the same standard as any other representative of the government. Therefore, I am imposing a fine of $5,000 for this violation. You are expected to pay it within 48 hours. The room fell into dead silence. Then, like the strike of a match, murmurs of disbelief filled the air. Bondi's expression remained composed, but those who knew her well could see the fire in her eyes. She reached for a pen, signed a check on the spot, and handed it to the bailiff with an air of defiance. As she turned back toward the bench, her voice rang clear and strong. "Your Honor, I will pay this fine, but I assure you this discussion is far from over." Judge Lancaster narrowed his eyes. "Then I expect you to take the proper legal steps, Attorney General." Bondi gave a confident nod. "Oh, I will." And just like that, the seeds of an unprecedented legal showdown had been planted. The moment Pam Bondi exited the courthouse, the media swarmed like bees to honey. Microphones and cameras pointed in her direction, their operators desperate for a soundbite that could capture the shock reverberating across the country. "Attorney General Bondi, do you plan to appeal the judge's ruling?" shouted one reporter from the Washington Post. "Is this a violation of your First Amendment rights?" another pressed, her voice barely audible over the frenzy. Pam Bondi paused on the courthouse steps, her posture straight, her chin lifted. Her golden cross glinted under the midday sun, a symbol she now refused to hide. She held up a hand to quiet the crowd, and like clockwork, the noise settled to an expectant hush. "I have served this nation with integrity and dedication," she began, her voice unwavering. "I am a public servant, but I am also an American citizen protected by the very Constitution I swore to uphold. Today, my right to express my faith was challenged in a court of law. Let me be clear, I will fight this ruling not for myself, but for every American who believes that faith and public service can coexist." The crowd erupted with questions, but Bondi didn't stay to answer. She turned and walked toward her car, flanked by her legal team. That night, every major news network led with the story. From conservative channels to progressive outlets, opinions were divided. Fox News labeled it an outrageous attack on religious freedom, while CNN framed it as a necessary separation of church and state. Social media exploded with hashtags like #StandWithBondi and #FaithOnTrial, drawing millions into a heated online debate. In a small town in Texas, a retired Marine named Jack Reynolds watched the coverage from his living room. His brow furrowed as he listened to the judge's ruling. "That ain't right," he muttered. "The cross ain't hurting nobody." In Los Angeles, civil rights attorney Maya Kim typed furiously at her laptop, preparing an op-ed. "This case," she wrote, "could redefine the boundaries of personal expression for government officials, and the stakes couldn't be higher." Back in Washington, Bondi's legal team worked late into the night. In her private office, Bondi leaned over a polished mahogany desk reviewing decades-old case law. She was no stranger to legal battles, but this one was personal. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. It was her chief counsel, Evelyn Harper, a whip-smart litigator with a knack for cutting through legal fog. "Pam, I found something," Evelyn said, sliding a legal brief across the desk. Westbrook versus Indiana, 1972. A state employee wore a religious pendant while performing official duties. The Supreme Court ruled it was protected under the Free Exercise Clause, provided it did not interfere with their professional conduct. Bondi's eyes lit up. That's our angle. This isn't just about a cross, it's about whether an American's faith can coexist with public service. Evelyn nodded. We could file an appeal directly to the D.C. Circuit. But knowing you, I'm guessing you want to take this all the way. Bondi smiled. A fierce, determined smile. We're going to the Supreme Court. The next morning, Bondi announced her intention to appeal Judge Lancaster's ruling. The case, now dubbed Bondi versus United States, was about to become a legal and cultural flashpoint. The official filing for Bondi versus United States sent shockwaves through the legal community. By challenging Judge Lancaster's ruling, Pam Bondi wasn't just defending her right to wear a cross, she was questioning the limits of religious freedom for every public servant in America. Within days, news outlets were buzzing. Legal analysts weighed in on the case's potential impact. Supporters saw Bondi as a courageous defender of the First Amendment, while critics argued that religious symbols had no place in government settings. In a sleek, glass-walled office in downtown Washington, D.C., Evelyn Harper spread out the team's legal arguments on a large conference table. Bondi stood beside her, arms crossed, her mind razor-focused. We have three main arguments, Evelyn began, pointing to the first document. 1. The First Amendment's Free Exercise Clause protects your right to express your faith. 2. Past Supreme Court rulings, including Westbrook versus Indiana, affirm that personal religious symbols are permissible in government spaces unless they disrupt official duties. And 3. Judge Lancaster overstepped, Bondi finished, her voice resolute. His ruling isn't just about decorum, it's an attack on constitutional freedoms. Evelyn nodded. If we can frame this as an issue of personal rights rather than public disruption, we have a strong chance of winning. Bondi tapped her fingers against the table, her mind racing through decades of legal precedent. We need an amicus brief from faith-based advocacy groups. Let's reach out to the American Center for Law and Justice. And I want statements from other public officials who openly wear religious symbols. You're building a coalition, Evelyn observed, her lips curling into a smile. I'm defending the Constitution, Bondi corrected, grabbing her coat. Let's get to work. 2 weeks later, as snow dusted the marble steps of the U.S. Court of Appeals, Bondi's legal team filed their opening brief. In a bold, clear argument, they asserted that the judge's ruling violated both the free exercise and free speech clauses of the First Amendment. Inside the courtroom, Bondi stood tall before the three-judge panel. Dressed in her signature navy suit, the gold cross still hung around her neck, a silent symbol of the very rights she was defending. Your Honors, she began, her voice echoing through the chamber, the heart of this case is simple. Can an American citizen, sworn to uphold the law, also exercise their constitutional right to religious expression? My position is clear, the law does not require us to shed our faith when we enter public service. The lead judge, a silver-haired jurist with a reputation for sharp questioning, leaned forward. Ms. Bondi, the government must maintain religious neutrality. How do you respond to concerns that your cross may signal a bias? Bondi didn't flinch. Respectfully, Your Honor, my cross is not a statement of bias, it's a testament to personal belief. Just as judges are trusted to set aside personal views when interpreting the law, public officials are capable of honoring their faith while serving all citizens impartially. Evelyn watched from the gallery, pride swelling as Bondi masterfully dismantled the opposition's arguments. Every word was calculated, every point rooted in the Constitution's promise of liberty. For nearly 3 hours, the court heard arguments from both sides. Bondi's legal brilliance shone through, combining razor-sharp reasoning with a deep understanding of constitutional history. When the hearing ended, reporters swarmed outside once again. Bondi's statement was brief but powerful. This case is not just about me. It's about protecting the rights of every American, no matter their faith. And we will fight to ensure those rights remain secure. In living rooms across the country, Americans from all walks of life tuned in. For many, Bondi's battle wasn't just legal, it was personal. And as the case advanced toward the Supreme Court, one thing became clear, Pam Bondi wasn't just defending her right to wear a cross. She was defending the soul of the First Amendment itself. The news broke on a cold spring morning. The U.S. Supreme Court had agreed to hear Bondi versus United States. It was a rare and monumental decision, signaling that the highest court in the land recognized the case's profound constitutional implications. Across America, the case sparked debates in churches, classrooms, and coffee shops. Was a public servant's personal faith a private matter? Or did it blur the line between church and state? Inside the U.S. Supreme Court, the stakes had never been higher. The justices, 9 of the most brilliant legal minds in the nation, prepared to hear arguments that could redefine the relationship between faith and government for generations to come. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. The air buzzed with tension as reporters jostled for space. Dressed in her signature navy suit, Pam Bondi walked confidently to the plaintiff's table. The golden cross around her neck seemed to gleam brighter under the harsh courtroom lights. As Chief Justice Hamilton called the court to order, the room fell silent. Evelyn Harper sat beside Bondi, gripping her legal notes tightly. This was it, the moment that could change everything. Bondi rose to present her argument. Her voice, calm and measured, carried the weight of her convictions. "May it please the court," she began. "This case is not simply about a piece of jewelry. It is about the freedom to express one's faith without fear of punishment. The Constitution guarantees every American, regardless of profession, the right to religious expression under the First Amendment." Justice Morales, known for her probing questions, leaned forward. "Ms. Bondi, government officials must remain neutral while carrying out public duties. Does your wearing a cross compromise that neutrality?" Bondi met the justice's gaze without hesitation. "Respectfully, Your Honor, no. My cross is a personal expression of faith, not a political statement. Just as the court allows other forms of personal expression, wedding rings, cultural attire, this symbol does not impair my ability to serve the law impartially." She paused, letting her words sink in before delivering her most powerful argument. "To penalize me for wearing a cross is to demand that I sever my faith from my public service. That is not neutrality, it is suppression. And if the government can restrict one faith, no belief is truly safe." The justices exchanged thoughtful glances, but the questioning was far from over. Justice Sinclair, the court's newest and most unpredictable member, tapped his pen against the bench. What limits, if any, should exist on religious symbols in government? Surely, there must be a boundary to maintain the separation of church and state. Bondi nodded respectfully. "Absolutely, Your Honor. The government must ensure no religious belief is officially endorsed. But personal expressions of faith, when they do not disrupt official duties, are constitutionally protected. If this court upholds the lower court's ruling, it risks creating a dangerous precedent where Americans in public service must hide their beliefs to remain employed." The courtroom remained riveted as Bondi carefully dismantled the government's case. She pointed to Westbrook versus Indiana and other precedents where the court had ruled in favor of individual expression over institutional policy. The Solicitor General representing the government tried to argue that visible religious symbols could create the appearance of bias. But as Bondi masterfully pointed out in her rebuttal, appearances cannot override constitutional rights. Our freedoms cannot be sacrificed on the altar of perception. When the arguments concluded, Chief Justice Hamilton's gavel fell. "This court will deliberate and issue an opinion in due time." Bondi exhaled slowly as she left the courtroom. Reporters swarmed her once again, but her message was simple. "We've made our case. Now the Constitution must speak." Across America, millions waited anxiously. Would the Supreme Court defend the right to faith or redefine its place in public life? For weeks, America held its breath. News channels ran endless debates, op-eds flooded newspapers, and social media buzzed with heated arguments. Some saw Pam Bondi as a hero defending religious freedom, others believed she was threatening the principle of church-state separation. The Supreme Court's ruling on Bondi versus United States would be one of the most anticipated decisions in recent memory. Inside her Washington, D.C. office, Pam Bondi sat alone, gazing at the framed copy of the U.S. Constitution on her wall. The weight of the case hung heavy on her shoulders. She had fought legal battles before, but never one so personal. Across the room, Evelyn Harper typed away furiously, preparing for every possible outcome. At precisely 10 a.m. on June 12th, the Supreme Court's decision was announced. Crowds gathered outside the marble-columned building as legal analysts dissected the opinion the moment it was released. In a 7-2 ruling, the court sided with Pam Bondi, delivering a sweeping defense of the First Amendment's protections. Justice Morales, in her majority opinion, wrote, The Free Exercise Clause of the First Amendment guarantees every American the right to practice their faith openly regardless of their profession. The government cannot compel public servants to hide or suppress their religious identity so long as their expression does not interfere with their official duties. She continued, to penalize Ms. Bondi for wearing a cross is not to preserve neutrality, it is to infringe upon her constitutional liberty. The court reaffirms that faith and public service are not mutually exclusive. The ruling was a resounding victory not just for Bondi but for the broader principle of religious freedom. Legal scholars immediately labeled the decision a landmark case, drawing comparisons to previous First Amendment milestones like Tinker versus Des Moines and Burwell versus Hobby Lobby. As the news broke, a roar of celebration erupted among Bondi's supporters outside the courthouse. Television anchors struggled to keep up with the flood of reactions pouring in from politicians, civil rights organizations, and religious groups across the nation. Back at her office, Bondi received the call she'd been waiting for. Evelyn, barely able to contain her excitement, said, "We did it, Pam. We won." For the first time in weeks, Bondi allowed herself a smile. "No," she corrected softly, "America won." That afternoon, she stood before a sea of cameras and delivered a speech that would be replayed on every major news network. Today, Bondi began, the Supreme Court affirmed a truth that lies at the heart of our democracy. No American should have to choose between their faith and their public service. The Constitution protects every citizen's right to live by their beliefs, and this victory ensures that those freedoms remain intact for future generations. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "This case was never about me. It was about defending the promise of liberty for all. Whether you wear a cross, a yarmulke, a hijab, or no symbol at all, your rights matter. And today, the highest court in the land stood on the side of freedom." Her words resonated across the country. In churches, synagogues, and mosques, faith leaders praised the ruling. Civil libertarians, even those who disagreed with her personally, acknowledged the decision as a profound reinforcement of free expression. But Bondi's victory wasn't just legal. It was cultural. She became a symbol of resilience, a public servant who refused to compromise her values. Requests for speeches poured in from universities and legal forums. Her inbox overflowed with letters, some congratulating her, others from ordinary Americans sharing their own struggles to balance faith and public life. In a small town in Texas, retired Marine Jack Reynolds watched her speech with tears in his eyes. "She stood her ground," he whispered, pride swelling in his chest. "And she stood up for all of us." Weeks later, Bondi returned to the courthouse where her battle had begun. This time there was no fine, no reprimand. She walked through the doors with her cross gleaming proudly, a symbol of faith, freedom, and a fight worth waging. As she passed the bench where Judge Lancaster had once ruled against her, she smiled. Justice, after all, had prevailed, and Pam Bondi had proven, once and for all, that the Constitution's promise of liberty belonged to everyone.